In this short video, I'm going to go through the first steps that you need to take in writing an essay about the problems of understanding the negative impacts that media can have on young people and society. And what I'm going to do in this first video is just explain the distinction between the way that we often find media risks being discussed in the media and the way that academics define the issue. And you can see down here that the essential message is really underlined by the title here. So the title of this overall presentation, Conceiving Media Risks from Behaviours to Political Socialisation. And this is really, I think, the crux of the argument that I'm going to make today, that very often when we think about the harm that media can cause to young people, we think of that in terms of the way that certain sorts of media may provoke antisocial, violent behaviour within certain sorts of individuals. And what I'm going to suggest is that there's a different, more significant and more productive way to think about these risks. And that's to think less about how certain media impact certain individuals and to think more about how cumulative media messages have an effect on entire societies in the way that they contribute to our political socialization. So, for example, the reason to worry about media violence isn't just because of the concern that it may cause real violence, but also because of the idea that images of violence have many kinds of impacts on our attitudes towards society. So at the end of, I'm going to split this up into 3 short videos, but at the conclusion of these videos, in combination with the basic reading that you should have done in relation to this question, so the unit book plus the Barry Gunter reading in particular, you should be able to answer the question, why is it difficult to measure the social impact of media content that some people think is harmful? So what that means is you should be able to take concerns about gaming or media violence or screen violence or something like that and try and explain in relation to academic ideas why it's actually difficult to substantiate some of the concerns that people have. Now, this is comprising of, in order to do that, you need to be able to do 3 things. As I say here, you need to explain why it's difficult to establish a causal relationship between media exposure and social behaviour. And in particular, the essay by Barry Gunter contributes to that. And you'll remember that I've actually sent you some key quotes from that article that you should be able to use in this regard. Another important thing is to grasp is that we're not dismissing the idea that things like media violence have a significant and quite often damaging impact on our society. There are a range of reasons why we might think that to be the case, but what we need to be able to explain is how focusing on the relationship between media exposure and behaviours actually underestimates the power of media industries. There's far more going on in the power of media industries than a focus on behaviors allows us to explore. And so we're going to be explaining why that's the case. And essentially, you need to be able to explain how a whole range of social, economic, and academic factors come into play when we're trying to assess questions of media and harm. And I'm going to be going over what those factors are. So the bottom line message is that the question of the relationship between something like media violence and harm is a multifaceted, complicated issue, and you need to be able to outline what those issues are in a clear way. And so just to underline these points, I'm going to be talking about these issues in relation to music, and particularly rap music. But I suppose what many of you will do for your essays, and a good way to illustrate these learning objectives, is to take a question that society is asking about how media cause certain kinds of harm, and just really explain how there's far more to the picture than is frequently presented in the popular media. So let's take a particularly vivid example of a place where media have attributed social harm to a particular kind of media content. Let's talk about the rap duo, the Insane Clown Posse, who come from Detroit. And Insane Clown Posse are a fascinating, they're not a group, they're really a cultural phenomenon. They're a media industry in and of themselves. So they begin as a rap duo, but they have really sort of cultivated, they're unique as a group in the sense that they are the only group that I know of who have spawned their own subculture, the so-called Juggalo subculture, who mimic the style of the Insane Clown Posse. The Insane Clown Posse have their own festival called the Meeting of the Juggalos. They actually started their own wrestling competition. They have largely eschewed mainstream record companies, so they're very innovative in terms of finding alternative ways of distributing their music. So they're a very, very clever media operation, a multimedia phenomenon. And in that sense, they are ideal to demonstrate the complexity of questions about the harm that media cause, because there's a lot of violent content in the lyrical content and a lot of violent imagery in the performances that Insane Clown Posse have put together. And the result of that is that they have been blamed for encouraging or contributing toward real murders. And this has attracted media attention. So let's have a look at an example of a piece of media content that shows this connection.
Real-life mayhem, some believe, is motivated by a certain sound and stagecraft. The musical genre, often appealing to teens, is called horrorcore, and there is no bigger name than the Insane Clown Posse. But while this pair may just rap about acts of savagery and violence, some of their devoted fans are living them. Hence the question, should these artists share in the blame? I asked them. February 2009. Two men calling themselves Juggalos are arrested after the body of 21-year-old Michael Goucher is found in the woods, stabbed more than 20 times.
Why would you bring a knife and a cleaver to a meeting?
September 2009. A 21-year-old Tony Lacasio is left to die after being beaten with baseball bats. He called himself a Juggalo, but it's alleged he snitched and lost his life. The chorus it would be 70 to 80 times with baseball bats.
We've got multiple individuals committing gang-related crimes, gang-motivated crimes, and they're using the name Juggalo.
Juggalos are devoted followers of one of the most successful music acts that you've never heard of. The Insane Clown Posse. They're part of a hip-hop genre called horrorcore. Music that celebrates murder, suicide, and decapitation.
Okay, so this is a piece by ABC News' Nightline by the famed interviewer Martin Bashir. And one of the reasons why this is such a notable sort of documentary is that the Insane Clown Posse are confronted with the idea that what they do has directly contributed to real life murders. And so this is very interesting in terms of the fact that here we have media performers talking about direct effects. And I want to show what they have to say about this, because one of the noteworthy things about their comments is there's actually a basis for some of their comments in academic literature, as we're going to find out shortly.
No, Violent J. A number of people who have been associated with serious criminal acts of violence and murder, have had some kind of connection to ICP and Juggalos.
And I'm sure they watch Stephen King movies as well.
They're no longer regarded as innocent lovers of your music because of a number of horrendous crimes that have occurred.
I say bullshit. I say it's not true. I say
It's
people
not
have
true.
the wrong idea.
Let me give you an example. In February 2006, individual attacks people with a machete in a gay bar. He kills a police officer in traffic stop. He calls himself a juggalo.
There's something wrong with that
He
kid.
was insane to begin with.
You better holler at his parents and see how they raised
What
him
about
all
in
messed
September
up.
2009, Sam McCroskey?
Come on, man. Who else do they listen to? Why don't you blame him?
What about February 2009? Michael Goucher stabbed 20 times by two self-proclaimed juggalos.
Well, you know, just the way you read these off is like it's like a brutal attack to try to make it sound like our fans are these dangerous people when it's misconstrued thing.
Violent J, I didn't say that. I am just reporting the facts of these cases. The individuals who perpetrated these murders and acts of violence
Once
were
again,
self-proclaimed juggalos.
I don't believe in this evidence you speak of. I don't believe that juggalos are. I believe, yeah, out of the millions and millions that have bought of our albums, yes, some of them probably have committed horrendous crimes, but I don't believe
You admit
this.
that?
Absolutely.
Now, the interesting thing about this case study is that, recall, what we're trying to do is we're not trying to dismiss the idea that things like violent media narratives that people consume are not things that are important, are not things that should concern us. But we are trying to explain that the relationship between exposure to these sorts of things and outcomes is a complicated phenomenon. And there are a range of questions that we have to ask in order to understand the full significance of things like the Insane Clown Posse, a phenomena like the Insane Clown Posse. And we have to understand that there are other sorts of questions that we might ask. Now, when Violent J in this video says, "I'm sorry, I think it's actually Shaggy 2 Dope," when he says that some of these juggalos also watched Stephen King movies, he actually raises a really interesting question that we might ask about this case study. And that is, why is it that when media seek to associate violent media with violent outcomes, they tend to focus in on certain kinds of genres and not others? So why focus on juggalos and not horror movies? And one of the intriguing answers that we find when we get into the literature on rap and effects and all these sorts of things is that some of the concerns about rap violence reflect not just the content of rap, but also the cultural biases that we build around rap, and particularly the extent to which we undervalue the element of performance in rap culture. One of the defenses that Insane Clown Posse have put forward in their work is that they are essentially characters. When they perform on stage in makeup, in grease paint, they are playing a role in much the same as an actor would be playing a role in a horror movie. And we accept that from other sorts of media genres, but we tend to be, or certain sectors of society tend to be less accepting of that idea when it comes to rap. So the question that raises is, if you are doing something about, for example, violence in rap, one of the questions you have to ask is not simply how does rap violence, if there is violence in rap, lead to real violence, but how is it that the positioning of rap as a cultural form seem to make its violence something which is somehow more threatening than other forms of violence. So when we're talking about this particular effect, we're not simply talking about the relationship between content and behaviors. We're also talking about overall social understandings of how media industries work and how it is that certain kinds of content are positioned as being more threatening than others. And we're going to be talking about that in relationship to Eminem. But just to end this video at this point, the first step that we've made is we have established that there are significant political questions behind the question of media effects. In the next video, what we're going to be looking at is what academics have said about the direct impact of media content.